understood the mechanics of loss. As a transit mechanic for the city of Philadelphia, earning a steady but modest $51,000 a year, he spent his days diagnosing the groans and shudders of machines much larger than himself. He knew the sounds of metal fatigue, of systems under strain, of parts quietly giving up. He did not, however, know how to diagnose the silence that had settled over his wife, Simone. A silence that felt heavier than any broken-down bus. It was a silence that filled their small Kensington Row home, a space they rented for $1,200 a month, its walls covered in the vibrant, hopeful drawings of their 8-year-old son, Jalen. Now that same silence was suffocating him in room 3B of the Sacred Heart Hospice, where the only sound was the rhythmic, labored whisper of his father's breathing. David, his father, was a man built of the same quiet resilience as the city itself. For 40 years, he had driven a SEPTA bus, his deep brown skin luminous under the fluorescent lights of the cabin, his hands steady on the wheel. He'd saved, lived simply, and paid off the stone Tudor in Chestnut Hill, a house now valued at $590,000, a world away from Carlton's reality. And now that world was shrinking to the dimensions of this sterile beige room. It was 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, drenched in a cold November rain. Carlton sat on a hard plastic chair, his own calloused hands holding his father's, which felt like a collection of fragile twigs. Across the room, Simone stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that had cost $350, a birthday gift from him that had taken 3 months to pay off. She hadn't touched him or his father since they arrived. "I can't do this," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the hum of the oxygen machine. "I can't just sit in that hospital one more hour, Carlton. It's morbid." Carlton didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on his father's face. "He's dying, Simone." "I know that," she snapped. "I've known that for 6 months. I've sat here. I've done my part. But Jalen is at my sister's, he needs dinner, and I have a blinding headache. This waiting, it's pointless." Her words were like stones dropped into a deep well. He felt the ripples of her impatience, her detachment. For months it had been like this. Every conversation about his father's declining health was met with a sigh, a complaint about the cost of parking at the hospital, or a pivot to their own finances. "We need to be practical," she'd said just last week, spreading their bank statements on their small, $200 IKEA dining table. "With your father gone, there will be expenses and assets." He had no idea how wrong he was about what she truly meant. Now, in this room that smelled of antiseptic and finality, her selfishness was a physical presence. "Go then," he said, his voice a low rumble. He couldn't find the energy to fight. "Finally," she muttered. She grabbed her $800 Michael Kors handbag from the floor. She walked toward the bed, hesitating for a fraction of a second. She looked at the dying man, not with sorrow, but with an expression Carlton couldn't place. It looked like appraisal, like a final calculation. She didn't kiss his father's forehead. She didn't squeeze Carlton's shoulder. "Call me when, she said, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut at 6:03 p.m. Carlton was alone with his father. He felt the release of a tension he didn't realize he'd been holding. The room felt lighter, cleaner. He leaned his forehead against his father's hand and finally let the tears come. The rain outside streaking down the window pane like a mirror to his own grief. What he didn't know was that Simone wasn't going to her sister's. She wasn't thinking about Jalen's dinner. She was driving her 2018 Nissan Rogue, a car with a $420 monthly payment, directly to a 24-hour copy shop. She had a document in her expensive bag, a document her lawyer had drafted 2 weeks prior. A document she was about to put into motion with a cruelty so precise, it was breathtaking. Have you ever felt so completely alone in a room full of people, or even with the one person who is supposed to be your partner? It's a cold, sinking feeling, and Carlton was about to find out just how deep that feeling could go. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to face a difficult moment without the support you deserved. The hours after Simone left were a blur of sacred quiet. Carlton talked to his father, his voice soft, recounting memories of working on old engines together, of fishing trips on the Schuylkill River, of the day Jalen was born. He held a cool cloth to his father's brow and watched the city lights begin to glitter through the rain-slicked window. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a connection to the man who had taught him everything about integrity and quiet strength. Earlier that day, at 2:11 p.m., something significant had happened. His father had rallied, a brief, startling window of lucidity. His eyes, cloudy for weeks, had cleared. He had looked at Carlton and squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Get Anya," he'd whispered, his voice raspy. Anya Sharma was his father's estate lawyer, a sharp, kind woman who billed at $1,200 an hour, a fee his father had insisted was an investment in peace. She had arrived within 30 minutes, her briefcase containing a single thick document. "David, are you sure?" she'd asked gently, her voice a calm anchor in the room. His father had nodded, his gaze fixed on Carlton. "A man's real legacy isn't what he owns," David said, his voice gaining a bit of its old timbre. "It's what he protects." With a notary public as a witness, his father had signed the papers. His signature was shaky but clear. It was an irrevocable trust, placing the Chestnut Hill house and his father's entire estate, valued at roughly $750,000, into Carlton's name, effective immediately. The timestamp on the notarized document read 2:11 p.m. It was a final act of protection, a father's last lesson in foresight. At the time, Carlton had been too overwhelmed with emotion to understand the full implication. He thought it was just his father tidying up loose ends. He had no idea it was a shield, forged just in time against a battle he didn't even know was coming. At 11:42 p.m., David's breathing softened, then slowed, then stopped. Carlton was holding his hand. The room went silent, the only sound now the steady drumming of the rain. He stayed there for a long time, the weight of the moment pressing down on him, a strange mixture of profound sorrow and deep, abiding love. He finally called Simone at 1:15 a.m. Her voice was thick with sleep, annoyed. "It's over," he said simply. "Oh," she said. There was a pause. "Okay, I'll see you in the morning. Try to get some sleep." The line went dead. "No, I'm sorry." "No, are you okay?" Just the click of a disconnected call, another small, sharp cut in a wound that was growing deeper by the hour. He drove home through the empty, rain-washed streets of Philadelphia in his 2012 Toyota Camry, a car with 187,000 miles on it, and a reliable engine he maintained himself. When he walked into their row home, the air was still and cold. A single lamp was on. On the kitchen table, he saw a drawing from Jalen. It was a big, green SEPTA bus. In the driver's seat was a smiling man with a halo, and in one of the windows, another figure was waving. Jalen had written in his shaky 8-year-old script, "Grandpa is driving the Angel bus now." Carlton picked up the drawing, his thumb tracing the crayon lines, and felt a fresh wave of grief wash over him. He sank into a chair, the piece of paper clutched in his hand, and he wept. The next morning was a study in contrasts. The world outside was gray and grieving with him, a persistent drizzle coating everything in a layer of damp sorrow. Inside their home, however, Simone was a whirlwind of brisk, unnerving efficiency. She made coffee, her movements sharp, her face a mask of detached sympathy. "We need to be strong for Jalen," she said, pouring coffee into a $15 ceramic mug. "And we need to be practical. There's a lot to handle now." Carlton, who hadn't slept, just nodded, his mind a fog of exhaustion and loss. He was wearing the same $40 work pants and faded t-shirt he'd had on at the hospice. Simone, meanwhile, was already dressed in a crisp blouse and tailored slacks, an outfit that looked more appropriate for a business meeting than a day of mourning. "I've already made some calls," she continued, not meeting his eyes, "to the funeral home. They need a deposit. And we need to start thinking about the house." "The house?" Carlton asked, his voice hoarse. "Your father's house," she said, a hint of impatience in her tone. "In Chestnut Hill. It's a huge asset, Carlton. We can't just let it sit there. The property taxes alone will be crippling. We need to get it assessed, probably sell it. It could change everything for us." She spoke of his father's home, the place where Carlton had grown up, the yard where he'd learned to throw a baseball, as if it were nothing more than a number on a balance sheet. He felt a small, cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was the same woman who had complained for years about the house's dated kitchen and creepy old furniture. Now it was the centerpiece of her conversation. "I'm not thinking about that right now, Simone," he said quietly. She sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound. "That's the problem, Carlton. You never think about the future. You're happy to just get by on your mechanic's salary. I want more for us. For Jalen, that house is our ticket." She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture that felt rehearsed and hollow. "Your father would want us to be secure." They had no idea what was coming. Her words were a lie, a carefully constructed facade to hide the betrayal she had already set in motion. For the next 2 days, this was the new normal. Carlton moved through a haze of funeral arrangements and condolences from family, his grief a heavy cloak. Simone, on the other hand, was energized. She spent hours on her laptop, looking at real estate websites, talking about market values and closing costs. She bought a new dress online, a $2,400 Burberry piece. "For the funeral," she'd said, though it looked more like something one would wear to a celebratory dinner. Each mention of the house, each dollar sign that flashed in her eyes, felt like a small betrayal, an erosion of the memory of the man who had just passed. He watched her one evening as she stood in their small living room, talking on her phone in a hushed, excited voice. "Yes, a stone Tudor, 6 bedrooms," she was saying. "The comps in the area are amazing. It's a complete game changer." She laughed, a light, airy sound that made Carlton's blood run cold. She was laughing. His father had been gone for less than 72 hours, and she was celebrating. This was the escalating betrayal, the slow, agonizing realization that the woman he had married was a stranger. He saw the condescension in her eyes when she looked at his work-stained hands, the dismissiveness in her voice when he spoke of his father's memory instead of his father's assets, the outrage accumulated in his chest, a silent, growing pressure. He remembered their wedding vows, her promise of in sickness and in health, and felt the bitter sting of hypocrisy. The sickness had come, but she had only seen the opportunity. On Friday morning, 3 days after his father's death, Carlton drove to the Philadelphia County Courthouse. Anya Sharma had called him. "Carlton, you need to come down and file the trust documents and the deed transfer. It's best to get it officially recorded as soon as possible." He walked into the grand, cold building, the original trust document safe in a manila envelope. The air inside was still and smelled of old paper and floor wax. He found the records office, a large room with fluorescent lights humming overhead. He took a number and waited, his worn $89 Timex watch ticking away the minutes. When his number was called, he approached the counter and handed the documents to a clerk. As the clerk was processing the paperwork, Carlton's eyes drifted to a public access computer terminal nearby. On a whim, driven by a flicker of unease he couldn't name, he typed Simone's name into the civil court filing search bar. He expected to find nothing, but there it was. A new filing. A petition for legal separation, filed by Simone Davis. And then he saw the date and time it was filed. Wednesday morning, the morning after his father died. At 8:31 a.m., his heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the blood drain from his face. He clicked on the case number, and the document summary loaded on the screen. He read the words, and the world tilted on its axis. The petition listed their shared assets, which were meager. But then it listed anticipated marital assets, and there it was, spelled out in cold legal language. 50% interest in the real property located at 724 Willow Grove Avenue, Philadelphia, PA, his father's address. An expected inheritance of the respondent, Carlton Davis. She hadn't even waited for his father's body to be cold. She had left his deathbed, and the very next morning she had gone to a lawyer and filed a legal claim on the house she assumed he would inherit. Her departure from the hospice, her headache, her concern for Jalen, it was all a lie. A cover story for the first step in her meticulously planned financial strike. He stood there staring at the screen, the clerk's voice a distant buzz in his ears. The date on the filing was the key. 8:31 a.m., Wednesday. Hours after his father had passed, but also crucially, hours after his father had signed the irrevocable trust. The trust that had been executed at 2:11 p.m. on Tuesday. At that moment, the grief in his heart was eclipsed by a cold, clear, and absolute certainty. The woman he had loved was gone. In her place was a predator who had seen his family's deepest moment of pain as her golden opportunity, and she had just made a critical mistake. Carlton walked out of the courthouse and into the weak afternoon sunlight. The city felt different, its edges sharper, its colors muted. He sat in his old Camry, the engine off, and held the steering wheel with trembling hands. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. He felt a wave of nausea, then a surge of anger so pure and cold it felt like ice water in his veins. He did not drive home. He did not call Simone. His first instinct was to scream, to confront her, to throw her own treachery in her face. But then he thought of his father's last words. A man's real legacy isn't what he owns, it's what he protects. His father hadn't just been talking about the house. He was talking about Jalen. He was talking about dignity. A confrontation would be messy. It would be loud. Jalen would hear it. It would accomplish nothing but to give Simone the satisfaction of a fight. No. His father was a quiet man who planned ahead. Carlton would honor him by doing the same. This would not be a war of words. It would be a war of paperwork, a war of timestamps. His first call was to Anya Sharma. He explained what he had found, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside him. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Anya spoke, her voice laced with a mixture of sympathy and steel. Carlton, I am so sorry. I've seen a lot of things in my practice, but this is exceptionally predatory. What does it mean? He asked. Her filing. It means she's a fool, Anya said. And for the first time, Carlton felt a flicker of something other than pain. She filed a claim on an asset that at the time of her filing, you did not possess and were not legally entitled to inherit. At 8:31 a.m. on Wednesday, the property at 724 Willow Grove Avenue was all ready and had been for 18 hours, the sole property of the David C. Davis Irrevocable Trust, of which you are the sole trustee and beneficiary. Her claim is on an expectation. The law, however, deals in reality. The plan began to form piece by piece during that phone call. It was simple, elegant, and devastating. Step 1. Strategic restraint. He would go home and act as if nothing had happened. He would play dumb. He would let Simone believe her plan was proceeding perfectly. Step 2. Evidence. He would let her talk. He would listen to her plans for the house, her dreams of a new life funded by his father's legacy, and he would mentally record every word. Step 3. The strike. Anya would handle everything. She would file a motion to dismiss Simone's petition. She would serve Simone's lawyer. It would be quiet, professional, and final. She won't see it coming, Anya promised. Her own lawyer will be the one to tell her that her entire case is built on sand. The cost for this legal maneuver would be around $5,000, money that would come from the trust. It felt like a small price to pay for justice. When Carlton finally got home that evening, the house felt like a stage set. Simone was in the kitchen, humming as she scrolled through her phone. Jalen was on the living room floor, meticulously coloring in the bus drawing he'd made. "Hey, honey," Simone said, looking up with a bright, false smile. "How was your day?" "It was fine," Carlton said, his voice even. "Just ran some errands." He sat on the floor with Jalen, his back to Simone. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion he could finally let show. "That's a beautiful bus." Jalen pointed with a brown crayon, the color he'd used for the figures in the window. "That's you, Daddy, and that's me. We're black, like